Good afternoon and welcome to the Geneva Press Club. Welcome to those following and joining us online as well. Le Club Suisse de la Presse est très heureux d'accueillir aujourd'hui la Fondation Secours Humanitaire pour une conférence séminaire en marge de la 60e session du Conseil des Droits de l'Homme qui se tient jusqu'au 8 octobre à Genève. The Geneva Press Club is pleased and honored to welcome the Humanitarian Relief Foundation on the occasion of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva for a side event dedicated to the situation in Gaza and titled Restoring Dignity in Gaza, Humanitarian Responses to Prolonged Displacement. Gaza, as you know, is facing one of the most serious and tragic humanitarian crises in modern times. This panel brings together international experts and humanitarian actors to share insights on mental health, psychosocial support, human dignity, and humanitarian responses. I'm now very glad to give the floor to the Humanitarian Relief Foundation representative and moderator, Mrs. Hind Momen. She's in charge of institutional relationship and plaidoyer for HRF. Mrs. Momen, you have the floor.
Merci Madame Falconier. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Nous remercions très chaleureusement le Club Suisse de la Presse pour son accueil et son professionnalisme, en particulier Monsieur Claire. Merci pour votre temps et votre énergie dans l'organisation de cet événement. Un immense merci également à nos intervenants qui sont des personnalités très occupées et qui ont accepté de nous donner de leur précieux temps afin de partager leurs réflexions et leur expérience avec nous aujourd'hui, ici, dans la Genève internationale. Now, I will switch to English so that everyone can follow. Today's side event is organized under the theme Restoring Dignity in Gaza. The aim is to rethink humanitarian action in order to put people at the center and restore their dignity, while highlighting the realities on the ground and strengthening advocacy for humanitarian intervention in Gaza. This is precisely what we will be exploring today with our eminent panelists. On behalf of the Humanitarian Relief Foundation, I would like to sincerely thank our distinguished speaker for being here with us today in International Geneva and for taking the time to share their expertise on such an urgent issue at the situation in Gaza. We are honored to welcome Madame SOHA ALAMI, Director of the Palestinian Office of the Humanitarian Relief Foundation. It is a great pleasure to introduce Ms. Chris GUNNESS, former Chief Spokesman of UNRWA and Director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. And we are very pleased to have with us Ms. Sam Ross, Acting Director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza. We are also honored to welcome Ms. Mahmoud Hemmo, Global Mental Health Expert, Research Associate at Université of Zurich, Psychoanalyst and Clinical Psychologist. And we are delighted to introduce Mr. Omar Rasheed, Psychologist, Mental Health and Psychosocial Cooperation Advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Merci à vous. We now begin with Ms. SOHA ALAMI, Director of Fondation Secours Humanitaire Office in Palestine, based in Ramallah. She is a Palestinian from Gaza. We are truly honored to have her with us in Geneva today, despite the many challenges of her journey, crossing checkpoints from Ramallah to Jordan, and then traveling for Amman. She has made it to be with us. This is a powerful testimony of her dedication. SOHA leads our work directly on the ground in daily contact with the population in Palestine, ensuring that our humanitarian action is not only meaningful but deeply connected to the people we serve. Her presence here is a reminder of the courage and commitment required to carry out this mission under such difficult circumstances. She will deliver her presentation in Arabic. I will translate into French, and our speaker have already received the written English version. And as you know, in Geneva, most participants are comfortable with both French and English. So we are grateful for this multilingual exchange. Ms. Alami, you have the floor.
الحضور الكريم، يشرفني أن أكون معكم اليوم لتمثيل مؤسستنا مؤسسة الإغاثة الإنسانية التي تأسست عام 2009 في جنيف كمؤسسة سويسرية غير ربحية تعمل في المجال الإنساني والتنموي مع تركيز خاص على فلسطين.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers participants, j'ai l'honneur d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour représenter notre organisation, la Fondation Secours Humanitaire, créée en 2009 à Genève en tant qu'organisation suisse à but non lucratif, œuvrant dans le domaine humanitaire et du développement avec un accent particulier sur la Palestine.
ومن خلال مكتبنا التمثيلي في رام الله وفرعنا في غزة نتابع تنفيذ برامج متعددة تشمل دعم الأيتام والطلبة، تعزيز التعليم والصحة، التنمية الاقتصادية والاستجابات الطارئة في الأزمات. وقبل أن أواصل اسمحوا لي أن أشارككم مقطعا قصيرا يعكس بعض أعمالنا على الأرض.
À travers notre bureau de représentation à Ramallah et notre antenne à Gaza, nous mettons en œuvre divers programmes, notamment le soutien aux orphelins et aux étudiants, la promotion de l'éducation et de la santé, le développement économique et les réponses d'urgence lors des crises. Avant de poursuivre, permettez-moi de partager avec vous un court extrait vidéo qui illustre une partie de notre travail sur le terrain.
وهذا مجرد جزء مما نقوم به يومياً والتزامنا مستمر رغم كل التحديات. أشكركم على حسن استماعكم وسأعود لاحقاً لإشارتكم تفاصيل مشروعنا الجديد للاستجابة الطارئة في غزة.
Donc, ceci n'est qu'un aperçu de ce que nous accomplissons chaque jour. Notre engagement reste constant malgré tous les défis. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je reviendrai plus tard pour vous présenter les détails de notre nouveau projet de réponse d'urgence à Gaza. So, thank you very much, Ms. ALAMI, for the presentation and for the video showing the daily humanitarian efforts made by our foundation in Palestine. I now have the great honor of welcoming Mr. Chris GUNNESS, former chief spokesperson for UNRWA and director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. For many years, Mr. GUNNESS has been one of the leading figures drawing international attention to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the need for accountability and justice. Mr. GUNNESS, thank you again. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Israel's sustained and systematically orchestrated two-year assault on the Gaza Strip now has a name: the Gaza Genocide. The UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry was unequivocal in its report published last week. Israel is engaged... Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought you couldn't hear me. Israel is engaged in genocide against the Palestinian people. From now on, the name of the world's newest genocide, the Gaza Genocide, must be hammered into the discourse, boldly used, unapologetically, and without fear, never forgotten. To do otherwise is genocide denial, an insult, a disrespect to the memory of the tens of thousands of Gazans who have been killed in what we now have a solid legal basis for calling the Gaza Genocide. The Commission reached its landmark conclusion by investigating 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined by the 1948 Genocide Convention. It gathered 16,000 pieces of evidence covering the period 7th of October 2023 to 31 July 2025. Israel was determined to have engaged in all 4 of these genocidal acts as a matter of state policy. On the first of these, killing members of the group, the Commission presented evidence that over 60,000 people were killed, of whom over 18,000 were children and nearly 10,000 were women. As of May 2025, Israeli intelligence officials listed 8,900 militants from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad as dead or probably dead. Given that by this date 53,000 Palestinians had been killed, Israel was making a public admission that 83% of its victims were civilians. Journalists have been deliberately targeted in Israel's ongoing attempt to hide from the world the truth of its genocide. As for those striving to mitigate the humanitarian impact of Israel's genocide, Gaza has become the deadliest place in the world for aid workers. 554 have been killed, including 373 UN staff, mainly UNRWA, and 167 NGO workers. And so I turn to the second category of genocidal acts causing serious bodily or mental harm. As of 30 July 2025, according to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, the number of people injured stood at 146,269. According to UNICEF, the total of children injured between 7 October 2023 and March 2025 was over 34,000. According to OCHA, Gaza is home to the largest cohort of child amputees in modern history, many deliberately targeted. The Commission found that Israeli security forces' use of lethal weapons and ammunitions have resulted in long-term, life-changing, debilitating physical injuries, including loss of limbs, traumatic brain injuries, and damaged internal organs. The consequences of such severe injuries have been compounded by the lack of functioning healthcare infrastructure. There have been frequent reports of limbs being amputated without anaesthetics and women giving birth by caesarean section unanaesthetized. According to the Commission, 1.9 million people were displaced from October 2023 to 25 June 2025, most on average at least 6 times, some as many as 19 times. In July 2024, UNICEF stated that almost half of Gaza's 1.2 million children need mental health support. According to the Israeli authorities, between 7 October 2023 and July 2024, Israel arrested more than 4,500 Palestinians in Gaza, many of whom were transferred to facilities in Israel for interrogation. The Commission received numerous reports of detainees, including children, being stripped, blindfolded, kicked, beaten, sexually assaulted, raped, and subjected to death threats and other forms of physical torture. I now turn to the third category of genocidal acts under the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Almost immediately after the 7 October attack, the Israeli authorities announced a total siege on Gaza. In December 2023, OCHA referred to the humanitarian situation as apocalyptic. Ladies and gentlemen, the number of bombs dropped on Gaza is extraordinary, even in comparison to other world conflicts. One military official told the UN Commission Israel was dropping in less than a week what the United States dropped on Afghanistan in a year, in a much smaller, much more densely populated area. Credible comparisons have been made between Gaza and Hiroshima in relation to the amount of civilian infrastructure destroyed, about 70%. Gaza's health system has collapsed, with 94% of hospitals damaged or destroyed. The few remaining run with almost no supplies, and more than half of those still operating are in Gaza City, currently under full Israeli military assault. Perhaps the most shocking act in this third category of genocidal crime is deliberate starvation, as it involves such widespread complicity in the Israeli bureaucracy. In August this year, the UN officially declared that there was starvation in Gaza. The UN-backed IPC, an internationally accepted system for assessing food security, estimated that a quarter of Gaza's 2.3 million people were suffering from famine. Starvation is reported in a fifth of all households in the Gaza Governorate. According to the UN, 1 in 3 children there were actually malnourished, to the point where at least 2 children in every 10,000 were dying every single day. These statistics were gathered before the start of Israel's military assault on Gaza City. The World Food Programme estimates that at least 15,500 metric tons of food per week is needed to meet life-saving needs in Gaza alone. Between 1 and 15 September, Israel allowed the UN aid system to take only 40% of that in. Much of it was subsequently lost, as the Israeli army routinely directs UN convoys to travel along routes known for violent looting. 21 out of 50 malnutrition treatment centres in northern Gaza, including 10 in Gaza City, have closed in recent weeks due to Israel's military offensive and evacuation orders. Israel has destroyed over 85% of clean water facilities. Households survive on only 3 to 5 litres per person per day, well below survival thresholds. Preventative diseases have spiked sharply, including a reported 3-fold increase in diarrhea and a more than doubling of jaundice. During Israel's aid blockade this spring, the World Health Organization reported stock zero for key items, as nearly half of essential medicines ran out. Excuse me. The agency reported that only 44 trucks of health supplies have entered Gaza in September, shockingly far below need. And given the conditions on the ground and restrictions on the movement of people, There is a serious risk that more than 15,000 patients requiring emergency medical evacuation will be denied, with no capacity in Gaza to treat them. An estimated 70,000 litres per day of fuel are needed to keep hospitals, water systems, bakeries and cold chains functioning. Since the famine declaration, Israel has permitted only 41% of that requirement to enter Gaza, forcing constant triage by humanitarians and repeated shutdowns of life-saving services. As Gaza starves, just meters away, parked outside the starvation zone, on the other side of the fence, which Israel built around Gaza, are thousands of trucks full of food. Not far away are the restaurants and supermarkets of southern Israel. UNRWA estimates that there is enough food parked outside Gaza to feed the entire population for 3 months. Israel refuses to let them in. Instead, the Israelis continue to claim that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has staved off starvation, a claim that is demonstrably false. A recent GHF whistleblower described their food distribution centres and the areas around them as death traps, where over 1,000 starving civilians have been deliberately targeted and killed. And so I turn to the final category of genocidal crimes investigated by the UN Commission, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Attacks on healthcare facilities, including those offering sexual and reproductive healthcare services, have affected about 545,000 women and girls in Gaza who are of reproductive age. Direct attacks against the main maternity wards in Shifa Hospital and Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis rendered them inoperative for long periods of time. Facilities specifically designated as sexual and reproductive healthcare centres have been directly targeted or forced to cease operations. Shockingly, the UN Commission reported on the attack on Gaza's largest fertility centre, the Al-Basma Clinic in Gaza City, in December 2023. Around 4,000 embryos and 1,000 sperm samples and unfertilized eggs were destroyed. The Commission established that the Israeli security forces, in a deliberately targeted attack, launched a shell tank that directly hit the clinic and caused the explosion of 5 liquid nitrogen tanks, destroying all the reproductive material that was stored there for the future conception of thousands of Palestinians. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to Israel's genocidal intent, the Commission established this beyond all reasonable doubt. Many senior Israeli officials are quoted by the Commission, including the President, the Prime Minister, and the Defense Minister at the time of the October 2023 attack, boasting of their intentions to destroy the Palestinians in whole or in part. They incited genocide proudly and on the record, and numerous Israeli soldiers dutifully obeyed, triumphantly posting on social media as they destroyed whole apartment blocks, looted Palestinian homes, and gleefully violated international humanitarian law. The Israeli media spread the poison of dehumanization, enabling, indeed popularizing genocide if opinion polls are to be believed. But the recently published comments by Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, have revealed something even more disturbing: the commercialization of genocide. Mr. Smotrich has said on the record in a public forum, and I quote in unofficial translation, "There is a business plan by the most professional people. It really pays off. There is a real estate bonanza. We have started negotiations with the Americans. We have paid a lot of money for this war, but we need to decide how we make a percentage on the land marketing. We've done the demolition phase, which is the first phase of urban renewal." End quote. As Israel's vision of a settler-based Riviera in Gaza comes into focus, it seems we are witnessing the commercialization, not just of genocide, but of war crimes, crimes against humanity, apartheid and ethnic cleansing. And with Israel's publicly stated intention of massively expanding illegal Jewish settlements and taking complete control of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, we may be seeing the commercialization of illegal annexation. Ladies and gentlemen, the conclusion that Israel is committing genocide reinforces pre-existing third state obligations to prevent and to punish genocide. As the UN Commission concluded, and I quote, "The prohibition of genocide is a peremptory norm of international law, a legal obligation that is accepted and recognized by the international community of states, from which no derogation is permitted." In other words, all states represented at the Human Rights Council, and indeed all UN member states, have an obligation to prevent, but also to punish genocide wherever and whenever it occurs or may occur. The only question is how. Turkey has led by example, imposing an arms and trade embargo on Israel. Others are set to follow. Sanctions must also be imposed in support of the ICJ and the General Assembly's overwhelming demand that Israel end its illegal presence in Palestine, the deadline for which passed just last weekend. And if Mr. Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, arrive in the territory of any of the 123 member states of the International Criminal Court or overfly their airspace, they must be arrested and handed over to The Hague in accordance with the ICC arrest warrants and in accordance with treaty obligations. The coordinated recognition of Palestine at the UN General Assembly by such states as Britain, France and Canada will mean nothing unless it is backed by accountability. To be clear, there is now a double imperative, a twin justification to impose sanctions on Israel. Firstly, to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and secondly, to prevent and punish genocide. To this end, plans are afoot in the General Assembly to impose a full range of punitive sanctions: trade, military, diplomatic, cultural, sporting, academic, and more. This is not a choice for member states, it is a legal obligation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commission report represents an important legal milestone on the Palestinians' long march to freedom, justice, dignity and peace. It gives those who have long argued that Israel is committing genocide a solid basis in fact and legal analysis. This is not some global anti-Semitic plot, as Israel maintains. We must not delay action, as some have argued, until the International Court of Justice makes its determination on genocide. That could take years, and meanwhile it ignores the obligation to prevent genocide, let alone punish it. The greatest cruelties in the annals of man's inhumanity to man are given names: the Warsaw Ghetto, the Tiananmen Square massacre, to name but two. And though uniquely different, we now have the Gaza genocide. It is now an undeniable touchstone in the global discourse. It must become a rallying point for solidarity with the Palestinians and a springboard for robust international action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. GUNNESS, for your eloquent speech, referring to the report of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry and the 4 acts defined in the Genocide Convention. You have established a link between legal analysis and human reality. You have brought us back to the heart of our theme, which is restoring dignity in Gaza. We are grateful to you for the clarity and moral force of your words. Thank you so much. We now move from a voice that has long drawn the world's attention to Gaza to the person who manages humanitarian services on the ground on a daily basis. We are privileged to welcome Mr. Sam Ross. Mr. Ross, are you here?
Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Mr. Ross, thank you for your presence. In your role as acting director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza, you have seen firsthand the evolution of this unprecedented humanitarian crisis. How would you define today what it means to restore dignity for the people of Gaza, and what concrete humanitarian approaches has UNRWA developed or adapted to maintain this fundamental human dignity, even the most extreme condition?
Thank you, Hind. And firstly, just to say it's a real pleasure to be with you today, the colleagues in the press club, but also the esteemed other colleagues who are on the panel. And would, before answering your questions, just pay tribute to the work that they do and all humanitarians and frontline workers inside of Gaza, including civil defense, medics, journalists, human rights workers as well, and people on the outside, such as Chris and others who continue to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinians, the plight of Palestinians in particular in Gaza, grounding their kind of analysis in the legality of the issues, but also the wider context in which all of this is happening. And I think it's important for this discussion because those on the outside, those on the inside who are working on this, they do it in an effort to reduce the suffering, to draw attention, but also to maintain dignity of the population, the civilian population of Gaza, who are going through the most indescribable horrors, whether that be documenting for the record what has happened in the absence and the continued prohibition of international journalists, or putting themselves in often grave harm to retrieve dead bodies for funerals, and ensure that a modicum of supplies are able to be provided to those on the ground. But look, your question was about dignity and restoring dignity, and dignity is essentially the recognition that human beings possess a special value intrinsic to their humanity, and as such are worthy of respect by virtue of the fact that they are human beings. And quite often it's difficult to talk about dignity in the current situation in Gaza, where for 24 hours a day for almost 2 years, all Palestinians, 2.1 million of them inside of Gaza, have been stripped of all humanity, are forced day in, day out to live in completely inhuman conditions. Families have been displaced multiple times, as we know. Homes have been lost. Children are forced to see their parents, their grandparents, their family members in absolute penury and absolute misery and physical and emotional pain. Parents themselves are unable in any way often to provide for their children in the most basic of ways, which is essentially, keeping them alive and providing for their safety. And those of us who are parents will, and even those of us who aren't, but those with this shred of basic humanity will understand what all of this means. And beyond this, and maybe building a bit on what Chris said, there are times when this appears to be precisely part of the point of what's happening. Yes, there is the physical destruction. Yes, there's the mental toll, but there's also, appears to be punishment of an entire society on all levels. The past 2 years have been about cruelty, humiliation, and fear, and reducing a population to absolutely no control over their lives, over their fate, over their ability to wake up in the morning, and at the same time the resources that the humanitarian system needs to respond to the needs and to mitigate some of this suffering are being deliberately withheld as a pressure tactic, and precisely to remove a shred of dignity from people's lives. So it's, oftentimes Palestinians in Gaza, whilst fighting to survive, are also managing and trying to comprehend and come to terms with the very cynical politics that lies underneath all of this. And it's very easy for people to lose faith in the constructs and the concepts that they've been brought up with. And I say that because the vast majority of the population of Gaza over the past 75 years has been through an UNRWA education system which teaches values of tolerance, human rights, conflict resolution, international humanitarian law. We know that oftentimes these concepts are scrutinized, and we look at, we work on some of the contents of what's in the textbooks is scrutinized, but they are the lifeblood of what Palestinians in education, in the education system in Gaza have learned over the past 75 years. And these concepts of law, of dignity, of accountability, you know, the Palestinian children and their parents are left wondering why these principles and these concepts and these legal provisions do not apply to them. And the fact that all of this has been, as we've said on multiple occasions, been live streamed, been documented all over the world, literally for the past 2 years, 24/7, and is being seen by the very same member states and governments that are not only paying for the humanitarian response, but are oftentimes funding the military assets that make a lot of this possible, and failing to put pressure on states to actually change the conduct of the hostilities, also makes it often more difficult to get your head around concepts of dignity, of maintaining dignity, of restoring dignity, and the response and how the metrics of what we're doing in Gaza are more often than not reduced to truck numbers. So again, it's agreements between the EU and Israel talk a lot about trucks, about crossing points, about volume of supplies coming in. They don't talk about the human beings that are behind all of this. So a further element of the way we frame the conflict and what's happening and our response to it in a way that is additionally dehumanizing and very undignified for the population on the ground, and also quite often impractical. We spend a lot of time counting how much flour enters, how many trucks of flour come in, how many crates of flour, how many metric tons of certain food commodities. I mean, that hardly matters if no fuel is being allowed in, so that people can cook the flour and turn it into something that they can eat. And in an environment where children are not in school, but they're spending all their day searching for water, scrounging and scavenging for sustenance. So these concepts are, and the concept of dignity, as Chris said as well. I mean, we shouldn't forget the complete disregard for IHL and statements by Israeli officials that were cited in the genocide case by the Board of Inquiry around dealing with human animals. And if that's how the entire population is being conceived, then the complete lack of dignity for the population and what appears to be impunity with repeated instances of statements such as this and actions and real pressure being put on Israel to change the way that it conducts its hostility has a real impact on how the people of Gaza see themselves, and how the member states who for so long have been relied on for providing assistance and development support inside of Gaza. So we're dealing with this very kind of perverse and environment where this momentum, which appears oftentimes precisely designed to undermine the dignity of the population, strip them of all humanity. It has created an evil and very cruel momentum of its own that it seems now difficult to pull back from. But this is the environment in which UNRWA is operating. This is an environment in which all humanitarian organizations and public service providers inside of Gaza, and I include in that the municipalities and the hospitals, etc., they are the ones who are continuing to deliver despite this hell. So I do believe within that there is something around how we provide those services, how we respond, how we treat the population, and I'll come back to that in a minute and say a bit more specifically about what UNRWA is doing. But I think in all of this, it's important to remember that the efforts to dehumanize the Palestinians, and here we're talking about the Palestinians in Gaza, didn't begin on the 7th of October 2023. This is a population that has survived for decades on the whims of a security establishment that has controlled the access and movement of all goods and all people for several decades. And again, your prospects for survival in terms of getting to university, in terms of getting the hospitalization treatment, the cancer care, etc., that you need to stay alive and provide for your family have long been restricted and long been beyond the controls of the individuals who are seeking this support. And that's created a strange situation in Gaza where you have very high levels of human capital in terms of literacy, in terms of educational performance, in terms of health outcomes and healthcare, but a population that's, even before the 7th of October was dependent largely on humanitarian assistance, that suffered from the highest levels of unemployment anywhere in the world. So, and it's within that environment that Palestinians were continuing to live and try and do everything that they could do to live with dignity, but were facing very extreme conditions and lots of constraints. And look, turning to UNRWA and what UNRWA does and what UNRWA can do, despite the Knesset legislation that came into effect at the end of this January 2025, which mean that I'm not talking to you from Gaza today, but from outside, because my own presence is prohibited, as is that of my international colleagues. Our national staff continue to work. We have 12,000 Palestinian staff working for UNRWA that continue to deliver services every single day. These are doctors, these are sanitation laborers, they're distribution workers, they're teachers, they're managing shelters. They're doing everything that UNRWA has always done in Gaza, but also pivoting and adjusting this to the realities of the humanitarian situation. So right now we have thousands of staff working in emergency shelters to make sure that the population inside those shelters have the support that they need in an extremely resource-constrained environment. And these staff, the 12,000 staff working for UNRWA and the many thousands of others working for other humanitarian organizations, have not stopped for a single day since the conflict started, and many of them, including my own staff, living in absolutely deplorable conditions. They've been displaced multiple times, like the rest of the community. They've lost homes, family members, and belongings, and they're contending with unfathomable grief, loss, and trauma. We have over 360 of our colleagues have been killed. So on average, once every second day, a staff member or somebody working for UNRWA has been killed. So the largest loss ever suffered by the United Nations anywhere. And specific to initially just to UNRWA staff, but I think now part of a broader construct is ongoing and often quite vicious political attacks against UNRWA, but against the humanitarian response in general, questioning its morals, integrities, integrity, effectiveness, etc. And by virtue of that, in a very lawless environment and a very militarized and weaponized environment, placing individuals at risk in terms of their ability to do their jobs. But despite this, they continue to serve and continue to support their communities and do so, because of the strong systems, because of the strong structures that we've put in place, and we've put in place over the past 75 years, but also by treating the population as human beings, with real people with needs and with rights, and who deserve to be listened to and deserve to be supported. And that's critical, I think, for maintaining, if not restoring, a sense of dignity. And as I already said, they often do this at great risk to themselves. Just before joining this call, and this was why I was slightly late, I was on a call with colleagues who remain inside Gaza City. UNRWA has 3,000 staff still inside of Gaza City. We now have tanks within 200 meters of our field office compound. We have had to suspend medical care at a number of health points and locations over the past few days, but we still have thousands of staff who are committed to staying for as long as they are able to stay, to continue providing services to the population that needs them. And that's critical for that connection, for the accountability that we have in terms of discharging our mandate, but also for ensuring that the population that are there can be treated with some kind of dignity. And we don't just deliver the services in the same way every day. We're constantly adjusting how we deliver those services and what kind of services we're providing based on the needs of the population, but based on also their movement. 300,000 people have fled Gaza City in the past 6 weeks. So as well as adjusting what we're doing inside of Gaza City, we're also reopening services in Khan Yunis, in the middle area of Gaza as well, so that people have services as close as possible to where they are, given the dramatic levels of physical and mental disability and injury that people are facing and are confronted with right now. It's critical that we and that the overall humanitarian system in Gaza is able to do that. And we do this because we're guided by very clear humanitarian principles which inform everything that we do. And they place humanity, they place the individuals, the affected individuals, right at the center of the response. And once you put the people at the center of the response, and that can inform everything else that you do. And of course, this is in stark contrast to what we're seeing with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been presented as an effective alternative to a UN-led system, which isn't delivering, and as I think Chris said, isn't delivering because of the deliberate constraints that are placed upon it that undermine its ability to function. So just to give a couple of examples, the UNRWA, we have over 100 distribution points that we've been using across the Gaza Strip. The entire humanitarian system has somewhere in the region of, or had somewhere in the region of 400 distribution points and service points across the Gaza Strip. That means if a family come to an UNRWA distribution center, they can receive food aid, they can receive clothes, shelter items. There are social workers on hand that can attend to their children or specific vulnerable groups. We have doctors and nurses on hand in shelters as well who provide monitoring, and if they identify populations with specific needs, they can refer them elsewhere within the UNRWA system or outside of the UNRWA system through the cluster-based approach, which informs humanitarian action across the world. That is providing for populations with dignity. That is providing an element of accountability listening to the population, attending to their needs, ensuring that we meet the needs of the most vulnerable first. And of course, we contrast that with what we see with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation today, that for the past 2 or 3 months has operated 4 or 5 sites where precisely the opposite has been in attendance, in terms of people literally being treated like cattle, being stripped of any shred of human dignity or humanity in terms of how they are expected to receive the very basics of what is intended to keep them alive, and which has been reduced yet again to a food parcel. And I don't really need to belabor the point around the GHF, but we'll be happy to provide more in the Q&A that follows. And look, we're doing this not just at great risk in terms of UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations, but in an environment where on a daily basis, the humanitarian space, which is our ability to operate, is being so squeezed. We face physical attacks, we face access-related attacks, and we are constantly challenged with disinformation, with propaganda, with misinformation, which appears to be designed to undermine the credibility of the United Nations system and led system, and undermine the effectiveness of the response. And a key point in relation to this concerns the famine response right now, when the organization UNRWA, my organization, which has the presence, knowledge, and assets to tackle the famine, is not being allowed to operate in full, given the restrictions that are based on our ability to bring those food supplies in. And that's just one of countless examples where it's very hard to explain to the population on the ground who are starving why the entity that is best equipped to provide for their needs and ensure that, famine response isn't just about food, but it's about water, healthcare, shelter, psychosocial and psychological support, nutritional supplies, etc., is being hobbled in its ability to respond. That undermines the credibility of not just UNRWA and community acceptance of UNRWA, but of the wider humanitarian system that doesn't have a very plausible answer to these questions. And as a result, the population who we're there to serve is suffering more and more with each day. And maybe just a couple of other remarks around dignity. I think within the immediate humanitarian response, it's critical that we continue to plan and prepare for the future. We do that particularly in relation to our education programs that continue in Gaza, both in physical form when the security situation allows it. During the ceasefire, we had 60,000 children in classes across the Gaza Strip. Those numbers are down to about 10,000 as of today due to the security environment. But critical that children are provided with the basics of learning, but also the basics of a structure, of a socialized environment of which learning is a part. I think that's critical for the children, also critical for their parents to maintain a sense of hope in the worst possible environment. Alongside the in-person learning, we do an awful lot of remote education as well, which has its foundations in a lot of the work that we and other education systems, of course, were doing during the COVID pandemic of 5 or 6 years ago. So children who aren't able to learn in person are still engaged with the education and the learning process through remote techniques, which are constantly being adjusted in line with the security environment, the availability of teachers and internet and bandwidth and things like that. And I think also critical events such as this in relation to dignity, that we continue to advocate for rights and respect for law and accountability. As I mentioned earlier, operating in a climate of impunity will not help to maintain or restore dignity. So it's critical that we continue to counter the lies, misinformation, and propaganda and noise, which is designed to discredit the UN-led humanitarian system, including UNRWA. And just to close, I mean, if we don't do this, the ramifications are massive. It's hard to tell populations on the ground that it's too complicated for us to provide service to them in a dignified way. But try, let me rephrase that. It's hard to tell the population on the ground that we continue to serve that the politics around all of this are too complicated for them to receive that assistance in a dignified and safe and secure manner. So that, of course, has ramifications for our ability to respond in Gaza. It has ramifications for the suffering of the population, for morbidity, for disease, for illness, for loss of life. It also has our ability, it impacts on our ability to recover from all of this, which I think is why it's so critical that if we are to maintain the dignity of the population in Gaza, then we need to retain UNRWA as a key instrument in providing for those needs. We have the systems, the structures, the infrastructure, the professionalization of the staff across all sorts of different disciplines: healthcare, education, social work, sanitation, etc. And look, if we fail in terms of maintaining a focus on that in Gaza, and if we're unable to maintain the dignity of the population, of course it will have major consequences for humanitarian action everywhere, humanitarian action across the world. And I think that's particularly relevant when speaking to a group in Geneva, the home and the heart of humanitarian action worldwide. So just to close by saying the consequences of failing on this have ramifications around the world. And if we don't stop it today, we know for sure that situation will continue to get worse, and our ability to maintain and restore that dignity will be further undermined. The one thing we have learned from this conflict is that conditions can always continue to get worse. And as far as Gaza is concerned, hell really does have no basement right now.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rose, for this comprehensive and enlightening presentation on the humanitarian situation in Gaza and UNRWA's efforts to preserve the dignity of Palestinians. To deepen our understanding of the impacts on a more personal and clinical level, and to explore responses in terms of mental health and psychological well-being, I now invite Mr. Mahmoud Hemmo. Mahmoud Hemmo is an expert in global mental health, a licensed psychotherapist in Switzerland and Germany, and a psychanalyst of Palestinian origin. He combines clinical expertise, international research, and deep cultural sensitivity, having worked for over 10 years in various contexts such as East Jerusalem, Ramallah, Lebanon, and Jordan. He currently practices in private practice in Basel, conducts research at the University Hospital of Zurich, and is pursuing a PhD at the University of Freiburg, Switzerland, focusing on development psychological interventions for refugees. As a leader trainer for several WHO interventions, he collaborates with international organizations, ministry, and NGO. Mr. Hemmo, how do you perceive the role of psychosocial support in restoring the resilience and the dignity of the people of Gaza, particularly in light of the challenges posed by the prolonged humanitarian crisis and extended displacement? Thank you.
First, before I would like to answer the question, I want to express my gratefulness for the invitation to this, very important forum, and I also thank the audience here, all those who are behind the screens via Zoom, for their commitment to the Palestinian people, as it stays important to speak about the unspeakable, to think about solutions in an unthinkable dystopia that is happening in the Gaza Strip in Palestine. The question to me would be, how could we give psychological support in a safe and responsible manner that reaches as much as possible people that are in need? For this, I would like to share with you my insights from my work as a independent global mental health consultant, as a psychotherapist, where we have, in cooperation with the World Health Organization, UNHCR, and UNICEF, planned, adapted, and implemented low-intensity interventions and other psychosocial programs. And I would like to put a spot on how those interventions, if coordinated well, orchestrated with a good target, can aim, first of all, to help people in Gaza to reduce their symptoms, and also to strengthen their coping, and we establish dignity. So I can just agree with the colleagues who spoke before. We are in a situation where since almost 2 years, the people of Gaza are experiencing something that is incomparable. Experts, including now also UN bodies, call it what it is, and the Israeli genocide on the Palestinian people in Gaza. Behind these words lie horrifying realities. Families that at night don't know whether they will survive it. Parents who don't know whether they can feed their children. Toddlers that are searching for their parents under the rubble. Patients dying based on the simplest diseases because there's no medication. Furthermore, dehumanizing statements by Israeli officials, they strengthen and intensify the despair that is already existing. The result is massive psychological stress and traumatization on a large scale, the whole entire society. It is shocking and shattering at the same time that such atrocities can be committed in the 21st century, while the whole world can witness it real time. The atrocities must stop immediately. Humanitarian aid has to enter Gaza in forms, for example, of water, food, shelter, medication. But also mental health and psychosocial support is important. The restructuring of a society after what is happening in Gaza would be merely superficial if we wouldn't care for mental health. As we hear very often, there is no health without mental health. There's a clear scientific basis for that. Mental health affects physical health, affects social cohesion, affects daily functioning, and as well the capacity to teach others or to learn at school or university. So logically, at the end, mental health also affects the effectivity of humanitarian aid other than psychological support. Only through targeted psychological interventions, there will be a chance for rehumanization and re-establishment of life in Gaza. It's about restoring dignity, self-efficacy, strengthening communities, and developing future perspectives as a basis for psychological healing. In situations where professionals are scarce or overwhelmed, peers and so-called lay helpers are the key component of support on a large scale. So I will present to you something that might be very helpful in Palestine, low-intensity interventions from the WHO, partly, and other organizations. So we got a toolkit of interventions that are available in various languages, are tested and established and adaptable, and might also work in very severe conditions. So with the support of lay helpers Help can come into schools, homes, and communities where formal services no longer exist. Let's start with a very easy and short intervention supported by lay helpers, psychological first aid. It comes into play in response to acute cases, acute traumatization. It's designed to reduce very fast and shortly and quickly, reduce stress, support adaptive coping immediately after a traumatic event by providing safety, practical help, and social support within a single session. The next step would be to include evidence-based brief psychological interventions, such as the EASE program for adults, called Early Adolescence Skills for Emotions, which is also carried out by lay helpers. It consists of 7 group sessions where beneficiaries playfully learn emotional regulation, stress management, behavioral activation. It also includes 3 caregiver sessions to strengthen family support and improve parenting style. So the scientific results are beautiful. They show us that after joining or taking part in the program, the adolescents show less psychological distress, less behavioral problems, better attention, more problem-solving skills, and they show the feeling of being well supported, while their caregivers also report less stress and show healthier parenting practices. Let's come to the most prominent example of low-intensity interventions for adults after crisis and war situations. It is called Problem Management Plus. In short, you would know it as PM Plus. In just 5 sessions, meaning 5 weeks, beneficiaries learn to reactivate and improve their capabilities of coping with stress, solving their everyday problems, getting active, and reconnecting with society using the basics of psychotherapy. It can be conducted individually or in groups. Furthermore, it can be supplemented with specific therapeutical modules, for example, such as trauma-specific approaches or Islamic spiritual approaches. The training of PM Plus helpers, those lay helpers who have not studied medicine or psychology, takes about 2 weeks, 8 days, maybe 10 days, something between that. The training of trainers, only 5 days, which can also be feasible remotely. Sure, we should not let those people do their work alone. They work the best and safest under weekly supervision in the beginning and later monthly. I have been personally involved in the training of hundreds of professionals and lay helpers from over 30 countries in PM Plus and other low-intensity interventions, and particularly in the Middle East and Europe. I can say it works. Also, they say it works. For example, a psychologist that works with us in Switzerland, where we are implementing PM Plus in more than 10 different languages for refugees, she reported that in her normal therapies that she gives, she expects improvement to be slow and gradual, while she was astonished that with supporting clients with PM Plus, she sees significant improvements after 5 weeks. Beneficiaries reported that before taking part in PM Plus, they felt hopeless, inactive, and under stress. And afterwards, they report a reduction in symptoms, regained structure in daily life, and reconnected socially. This is also confirmed by the numerous scientific studies conducted worldwide on PM Plus. These were so far interventions or examples of interventions with the support or delivered by lay helpers for scaling up psychological support. But let me be clear, pure reach alone is not enough. Psychological support, mental health support must be safe, must have quality standards so that the crucial and the first principle of humanitarian aid, which is do no harm, is met. This is where an innovative competency assessment tool called EQUIP come into place. Ensuring quality in psychological and mental health care is the full name of it. In short, EQUIP, which is a tool that is translated in several languages, established and published. And with it, through systematic observations of helpers and clients' role plays, with the standardized assessment of quality measures and quality items, and with the communicated feedback, competency-based feedback, the helpers' competencies are ensured, security is met, and training is becoming more effective with low extra costs. So far I have presented to you standardized, manualized interventions and also test options, test tools, how to improve broad, safe and effective aid that is urgently needed. Still, conventional approaches such as cognitive behavior therapy, narrative exposure therapy, expressive arts therapy, among others, are equally important. People don't need only crisis intervention and crisis support, but also strategies and support for long-term coping to restore dignity. That's also important because we know if trauma is not addressed appropriately, it can affect negatively and very hard the human beings an entire life, and not only the entire life. We know with decades of studies that traumatization gets transferred from generation to generation, if not healed. A stepped care approach is recommended, meaning starting with low-intensity interventions and referring those people who need something more specialized, more intensive, to specialized programs and professionals. Lessons from other genocides show that psychosocial support and psychotherapy alone are not enough. Long-term healing requires collective efforts, community-based approaches, including cultural practices such as spirituality, justice, and reparations. And let me be very clear, in the face of a genocide, this is a shared global responsibility for all of us. The Israeli genocide on the Palestinian people must end immediately. Help the Palestinians to survive so that the process of healing can begin. Therefore, we should consider the use of scalable interventions delivered by trained lay helpers under the supervision of professionals. And we should aim at strengthening partnerships between local and international organizations so that care is ensured broadly, safely, and effectively. The Palestinian people in Gaza have suffered enough already. The Israeli genocide, again, has to stop now. The Palestinian people needs our support. Let us take action. Not only fear is contagious, but also courage can ignite the same way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hemmo, for your insightful presentation. The tools you introduced are crucial for providing scalable and effective psychosocial support in a crisis situation like Gaza. You also rightly emphasized that psychological support alone is not enough. Durable healing must include collective approaches that incorporate culture, spirituality, justice, and reparations. This holistic perspective is essential for truly restoring dignity and resilience. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Omar Rasheed, a psychologist and mental health psychosocial support advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Dr. Rasheed brings extensive field experience in implementing and supervising mental health and psychosocial care in emergency context, including Gaza. Dr. Rasheed, given the considerable scale of needs in Gaza and the collapse of traditional support system, how is the ICRC adapting its mental health and psychosocial support intervention in order to effectively reach vulnerable groups and restore dignity, autonomy, and hope within affected communities? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. And apologies for my voice, I'm still a bit recovering. Yeah. If you allow me, I would like to first highlight a bit of what has recently been published in Mental Health Atlas by WHO. The figure is quite scary. It says over 1 billion people at the moment suffers from mental health condition, and that's quite a new figure. And that figure is a global figure. Now, in the conflict-affected area, where the population goes through extreme violence, the mental health needs, it's double. So it's twice as likely those people will suffer from mental health condition. And that means 1 in 5 to 22.1% of the population might need mental health support. Now, when we talk about Gaza particularly, I think it's crucial to highlight the fact that it doesn't matter how much humanitarian response or mental health intervention alone will not be enough. What is needed is a political solution to end this extreme violence that is happening. I think that's important to be highlighted before I narrow down on mental health, because that alone will not be enough. In terms of how do we work as ICRC in these exceptional circumstances, I think the crisis in Gaza pushed us all to rethink how we are delivering the aids, how we are intervening in the crisis. I think it would be inadequate to reduce the suffering to individual symptomology in Gaza. We do see signs of mental health condition across all types of disorders, anxiety, depression, and all of so forth. But we need to talk about the collective suffering that is happening. So the way we want to look at, if any, I think, meaningful response at this moment should be looking at the biological, psychosocial, and the psychological well-being. It cannot be just taken one aspect of it. The psychological part will not be if there is no meaning to the structural and societal well-being of Gazans at the moment. Now, to respond, let's say in ICRC, while we do focus by definition, we are in the places where there is armed conflict happen. Obviously, we ask everybody to play by the rule, humanitarian law, but that's not always the case. When it comes to mental health, we have been responding since day one, the ICRC in Gaza, including the Rafah field hospitals who integrated mental health and psychosocial support there, with the Ministry of Health, with the Palestinian Red Crescent, and local community organizations. What we learned so far is that even in other contexts, but more so in Gaza, is that the ready-made intervention, the protocolized intervention, is not useful. It's not enough, because that is not applicable at the moment. First of all, we cannot diagnose mental health condition the same way we would be diagnosing in a certain circumstances. And just before here, I talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. In Gaza, there is no post, it's continuations. So when it comes to the response, it's also the same way. The protocolized intervention, it might at this moment not be enough. Just before of this event, I was in call with our psychiatrist. She is working in Gaza, and she was talking about a group support that she's running with the children. And one question she asked the children, what gives you hope while being here? And I think the children kind of laughed at the questions, because they said, at 6 years old, looking for water and a food, I don't think it's looking at what is the hope and the future looks like for them. So what we do, it's at a short-term intervention at the moment, looking at the current situations. That does not mean undermining the mental health intervention and its importance at the moment, because people in the same group, they mentioned that they want the space. They need the space to share, to be heard, to be witnessed, and to be helped. So I'm saying that the protocolized intervention might at this moment not work, does not mean undermining the importance of mental health services at the moment. I think it's important to focus on the adaptation at this moment in this context that we are unfortunately facing. In the benefit of the time, because I know we are late, what I would like to say is that in ICRC, we also look at the other population vulnerable that usually it's not included in the response, whether it's a weapon-wounded, whether it's a person with disability, families of missing persons, usually it's left behind, or detainees. So those are mainly also the focus. I think it's important for ICRC. We think those inclusion of those vulnerable population and the groups are central to restoring the dignity. Humanitarian action in such contexts should not be only about the survival. I think it's also should be about restoring the agency, the identity of the people, but also the hope. I know it's difficult to achieve, but that's the ultimate goal. And we should not back down from that, even if it's difficult at the moment. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rasheed, for your insightful and practical reflection. You have reminded us how crucial it is to place dignity, autonomy, and hope at the very heart of humanitarian intervention, particularly by adapting to each local context and including the most vulnerable groups. It is important to remember that mental health needs in crisis situations often remain invisible and unspoken, even though they are just as serious and devastating as any physical injury. Addressing this need is essential to enabling true recovery and restoring dignity in Gaza. Now, I am delighted to welcome back to Ms. SOHA ALAMI, Director of the Humanitarian Relief Foundation Office in Palestine, who will present the comprehensive humanitarian project our foundation aims to launch in Gaza. This is a response plan prepared to bring urgent relief and dignity to those most affected, but to make it a reality, we need the support and partnership of the entire humanitarian community. So how you have the floor.
السيدات والسادة، بعد أن استمعنا لوجهات نظر مهمة حول الوضع في غزة، اسمحوا لي أن أشارككم ما تعمل عليه مؤسستنا كخطة استجابة عملية على الأرض. وقبل أن أبدأ بشرح تفاصيل المشروع، دعونا نشاهد مقطعاً قصيراً يوضح بصورة أوضح حجم المعاناة الإنسانية التي يعيشها أهلنا في غزة.
Mesdames et messieurs, après avoir entendu des points de vue importants sur la situation à Gaza, permettez-moi de vous présenter le plan de réponse que notre organisation met en œuvre concrètement sur le terrain. Mais avant d'entrer dans les détails, regardons ensemble un court extrait qui illustre plus clairement l'ampleur de la souffrance humanitaire vécue aujourd'hui par la population de Gaza.
كما رأينا في هذا الفيديو فإن المعاناة اليومية في غزة تتجاوز الأرقام والإحصاءات. على مدار العامين الماضيين يعيش القطاع أزمة إنسانية كارثية نتيجة الحرب المستمرة وتشديد الحصار. هذه الأزمة تسببت في نزوح أكثر من 1.5 مليون إنسان، اضطر الكثير منهم للعيش في خيام مؤقتة وسط ظروف بالغة القسوة واللا إنسانية.
Comme nous l'avons vu dans cette vidéo, la souffrance quotidienne à Gaza dépasse largement les chiffres et les statistiques. Depuis 2 ans, la bande de Gaza traverse une crise humanitaire catastrophique, conséquence de la guerre continue et du renforcement du blocus. Cette crise a provoqué le déplacement de près d'1,5 million de personnes, dont beaucoup vivent aujourd'hui dans des tentes précaires et dans des conditions extrêmement dures et inhumaines.
اليوم حرم معظم السكان النازحين من أبسط مقومات الحياة، مياه نظيفة وصرف صحي، رعاية صحية أساسية، غذاء كافي وحتى الحق في التعليم.
La majorité des personnes déplacées ont été privées des besoins les plus fondamentaux, de l'eau potable et de l'assainissement, des soins de santé de base, d'une alimentation suffisante et même du droit à l'éducation.
البنية التحتية دمرت بشكل منهجي تارك الناس بلا وسائل لتلبية احتياجاتهم. النازحون يعيشون في خيام مكتظة غير آمنة بلا خصوصية أو حماية. الأمراض تنتشر بسبب غياب المياه النظيفة. الجرحى وأصحاب الأمراض المزمنة بلا علاج. الأسر تعيش على مساعدات محدودة وغير منتظمة. والأطفال بشكل خاص يواجهون صدمات نفسية متكررة بسبب الفقدان والعنف والنزوح. هذه الأزمة أدت إلى تفاقم الفقر وسوء التغذية وانتشار الأمراض التي يمكن الوقاية منها، مما يهدد حياة الآلاف بشكل مباشر، وبدون تدخل إنساني عاجل ستتواصل الأوضاع في التدهور، مسببة مزيدا من المعاناة وتقويض كرامة وبقاء المدنيين في غزة.
Les infrastructures essentielles ont été systématiquement détruites, laissant les communautés sans moyens de répondre à leurs besoins élémentaires. Les familles vivent dans des abris surpeuplés et non sécurisés, sans intimité ni protection. Les maladies se propagent faute d'eau propre. Les blessés et les personnes atteintes de maladies chroniques restent sans traitement. Beaucoup de familles survivent grâce à une aide limitée et irrégulière. Et les enfants en particulier souffrent de traumatismes répétés causés par la perte, la violence et le déplacement. Cette crise prolongée a entraîné une aggravation alarmante de la pauvreté, de la malnutrition et de maladies évitables, mettant des millions de vies en danger immédiat. Sans une intervention humanitaire urgente, la situation continuera de se détériorer, causant davantage de souffrance et compromettant la dignité et la survie des civils à Gaza.
استجابة لهذه الكارثة أطلقت مؤسسة الإغاثة الإنسانية مشروعاً متكاملاً لمدة عام واحد يستهدف 500 عائلة نازحة أي ما يقارب 3000 فرد من خلال إنشاء مخيم إنساني مؤقت مجهز مياه وصرف صحي وإنارة بالطاقة الشمسية، يتضمن نقطة طبية أولوية للرعاية الطارئة إلى جانب مساحات زراعية صغيرة لدعم التمكين الاقتصادي والاكتفاء الجزئي، توفير الغذاء ومواد النظافة الأساسية بشكل شهري، تقديم دعم نفسي واجتماعي عبر وحدات متنقلة ومساحات صديقة للأطفال، توزيع خزانات مياه بسعة 1000 لتر لكل عائلة لضمان وصول مياه نظيفة للاستخدام المنزلي.
En réponse à cette catastrophe, la Fondation Secours Humanitaire à Genève a lancé un projet intégré d'une durée d'1 an, ciblant 500 familles déplacées, soit environ 3000 personnes, à travers la création d'un camp humanitaire temporaire équipé en eau, assainissement et éclairage solaire, incluant un point médical de soins d'urgence, ainsi que de petites parcelles agricoles pour favoriser l'autonomisation économique et l'autosuffisance partielle. La fourniture mensuelle de nourriture et de produits d'hygiène de base, un soutien psychosocial via des unités mobiles et des espaces adaptés aux enfants, la distribution de réservoirs d'eau de 1000 litres pour chaque famille afin de garantir un accès à une eau propre pour l'usage domestique.
هدفنا من هذا المشروع ليس فقط التخفيف من المعاناة الفورية بل أيضا استعادة الكرامة الإنسانية وتعزيز القدرة على الصمود. ختاما ندعوكم جميعا لدعم هذه الجهود وللعمل معنا من أجل ضمان حماية المدنيين وتقديم المساعدة الإنسانية بما يتناسب مع حجم الكارثة في غزة. شكرا.
Donc notre objectif à travers ce projet n'est pas seulement d'atténuer la souffrance immédiate, mais aussi de restaurer la dignité humaine et de renforcer la résilience. En conclusion, nous vous invitons toutes et tous à soutenir ces efforts et à travailler avec nous pour assurer la protection des civils et fournir une aide humanitaire proportionnée à l'ampleur de la catastrophe à Gaza. Nous vous remercions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, SOHA. So, in conclusion, I would like to warmly thank all our distinguished speakers for their valuable contributions, as well as all of you for your participation and commitment. The way forward requires collective commitment. We are now ready to welcome your question and ideas. The question and answer session is now open.
Thank you very much for your information. I'm an American citizen living in Switzerland my whole life. I noticed that America is still sending bombs to Israel. I noticed that they create here in Switzerland they created the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation illegally because there was no Swiss address, there was no Swiss administrator. So how come the Swiss can continue providing a safe haven for what we're talking about, whereas they let these criminal organizations continue? And how can America say that they're an honest participant when they're sending the bombs that then are used by Israel?
Thank you. Who is your question for?
Anybody?
Mr. GUNNESS?
Hi, sorry about that. Could you, I didn't hear all the question. I heard it was from an American citizen asking about the GHF and American support. But would you mind repeating the question, please?
Okay, I'll try and do it again. So basically, I'm an American citizen that's been living his whole life in Switzerland. And I find that these two countries somehow are supporting this genocide, one by continuing on a regular basis since years to send military aid to Israel. And the second one is that the Gaza Humanitarian Forum was created in Switzerland under federal auspices because it's a foundation with completely illegal thing, no Swiss address, no Swiss administrator or no administrator living in Switzerland. One wonders, what is this? It's a complete heresy, the whole thing. Now, I was also one of the founders of something called United Palestinianist Appeal back in New York. It took us 8 years to register, whereas creating a C5013 organization in New York takes 4 hours. So I've been with this whole thing since the late 70s.
On your question about American support, you probably are aware as an American citizen that 3.8 billion tax dollars, including, I presume, your tax dollars, goes to Israel every year. And there is no question in the minds of many that raises some serious questions about American complicity, not just in the genocide, but also in the annexation of the West Bank. So I would go further in saying it's not just a question of military and economic support. I think it's also a question of diplomatic support. So you saw just a few nights ago, the American delegate at the United Nations was the only delegation to veto a resolution calling for a ceasefire. So I agree with the supposition of your question, which is that there are real question marks over America's support for the genocide. And I would hope that moving forward, those things, that very thing will be investigated. As far as the GHF is concerned, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with Swiss domestic law. Suffice to say that I presume that there are government bodies which regulate charitable or humanitarian, or I don't know how they describe themselves, organizations. And I presume that your question would be better addressed to the government regulator whose job it is to oversee the operations of such organizations as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Thank you so much, Mr. GUNNESS. We have a question online from Madame Adou, I think for Mr. Rose. How can we support the work of UNRWA? What is needed? Is it money, psychological, medical aid? Mr. Rose?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I'd say three things, actually, in response. I mean, one is a more general thing about the situation in Gaza now and the urgency with which it needs to come to an end overall. Secondly, I think there is a continued need for political advocacy and for efforts to counter the ongoing misinformation about the situation in Gaza and about UNRWA's ability to operate. And as I said during my intervention, the scale of what UNRWA does in Gaza is unique. The integrated nature of what we do in Gaza is unique relative to other crisis settings where simply the international community does not have at its disposal such an effective instrument to meet the needs of the people. So the messages around the criticality of UNRWA's operations need to continue and efforts to undermine them to be countered. And then, of course, financial support on top of that, because without continued financial support, we're unable to provide for the salaries of the workers that continue to work every day in their health clinics, in the garbage collection work, in the water distribution, in the shelters, and in the learning spaces. So all three of those things is what I would say. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Any question?
Good afternoon. Thank you for this very insightful indeed presentation to get to know a bit more what is happening. So my question relates similar to what was posed before is when you talk to people going to work in countries like Gaza or DRC, people wanting to panic. So how can we get people to still, come on board and say, yes, there is opportunity, there is space for projects to be developed in the communities and to get the lives of the people on board? And is this feasible? Is it possible? And what are the projects? What are the priorities that you would highlight? Because we have enough people at the same time who believe in it. So we want to know a bit more. How do you set the landscape of security versus priority and the humanitarian, environment in which people will have to operate? Thank you.
Thank you. Someone to answer this question?
I can generally just say one thing for any intervention in the context we work is based on the needs on the ground. I think it's important that we don't go with a prepared meal from our head that this is need in the community, rather than asking the community what they need. And based on that, we develop the responses. I think that's the first fundamental. The second fundamental, I think, is that whatever is the approach is co-developed with the affected communities. Now, who would like to work in this context? We have to be realistic here. It's not everybody. First of all, it's a belief that you believe in this message. You believe in this mission. And if you have that, and if you have resources to access these places, you could do that. And I think it's our job to ensure that people have access to these messages. It's our job to ensure that people know about these opportunities. It's our job to do advocacy for people to contribute to this kind of missions. And this is part of it. I think it will raise the awareness among the general population to join this. That's my brief answer to this. Thank you.
Any other question? Thank you, Doctor.
Hello. My question is for Mr. Rose. What forms of independent monitoring or transparency could UNRWA consider to reinforce trust in its works while ensuring that children's education remains protected from political disputes?
Thank you. Mr. Rose?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, like any humanitarian organization operating anywhere in the world, we undertake independent monitoring and evaluation of everything that we do. Those look, these works look primarily at the programmatic outcomes and whether the projects have delivered what they were intended to deliver. On top of that, UNRWA has very robust mechanisms in place to oversee and monitor the integrity and the neutrality of its operations, and including the staff that deliver those services. And indeed, in the wake of allegations made by Israel in early 2024, actually, that came to light the same day as the first ICJ ruling, an independent investigation or assessment was conducted by a former French Foreign Minister, Colonna, and she herself concluded that the agency has in place the most robust and mature mechanisms of any comparable organization to ensure the integrity of its operations. We're always committed to doing more, and on the back of that assessment, we have undertaken to strengthen our mechanisms for overseeing what we do and for ensuring the conduct, the appropriate conduct of our staff, and monitoring their actions and ensuring that standards are upheld. We are a UN organization, of course, and we can only function properly in this area with the support from the member states and the host authorities, and until October the 7th, the government of Israel, in raising with us any concerns that they have. So I think it's critical to say that the member states, who themselves possess security services, possess intelligence services, have a critical role to play if UNRWA's required to uphold the neutrality and the integrity of its operations. Thank you very much.
Hind, do you mind if I just add one thing, please?
Yeah.
And that is, of course, as Sam quite rightly said, the Colonna report made clear that UNRWA has more robust systems for implementing neutrality frameworks than any other UN agency. But she also went further, and she made it clear that Israel, having very loudly and across the international media accused UNRWA workers of taking part in the 7th of October 2023 attacks. And although Israel and its front organizations, and there are many organizations which claim to be advocating for human rights and for free speech and educational textbooks and all sorts of things, but we know that many of those are actually front organizations for the state of Israel. If any of those had any information about UNRWA being guilty, some said that 10% of UNRWA staff were infiltrated by, Hamas had infiltrated, there were 10% of the staff. If any of that had been remotely true, it was not given over to the Colonna report. And, when I was at UNRWA, I always used to say, when there are credible allegations, UNRWA will always investigate and take disciplinary action up to and including dismissal. And the fact that none of these organizations, not the State of Israel, nor any of its proxy front organizations, produced any evidence to the Colonna report, for me, is proof positive that credible evidence did not exist. Now, in spite of the fact that Colonna said that no evidence was produced by Israel, various organizations have continued to pump out this fake news. It's the kind of drip, drip, drip of fake news, which eventually seeps into the discourse. But my point is, and I called it at the time, the mother of all lies. As far as I was concerned, if Israel had evidence that there were 12 UNRWA workers who were involved in the attacks, then, you know, it would have been everywhere. It wasn't. Israel produced absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Neither did it then, neither has it since. And if any of its organizations really had any of that incriminating evidence, it would have provided not just to the Kelowna investigation, but also to the internal UN investigation, which again found no conclusive evidence that UNRWA staff were involved, or these wild, crazy claims that 10% of UNRWA staff are members of Hamas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to give you the last word, Mr. GUNNESS. It's an honor. Thank you again to all our distinguished speakers and everyone online and in person. Thank you. Merci.
Would you like me to end with a few words?
What?
Oh.
Thank you.
Can you repeat, Mr. GUNNESS? I don't hear.
Entendu.
Merci.
It was a pleasure to meet you. Unfortunately, we have to run to our train. Can I give it there?